Hello and welcome back to our course on HTML5 for beginners. And in this section, we'll be talking about HTML, right? So in the previous sections, we've been talking about web development and the tools that we'll be needing for our course. But then from now henceforth, we'll start talking about one of the languages that we've mentioned earlier in the course that is required in web development. The basic language actually, which is HTML. The topic of the course is overview of HTML. So let's look into what HTML is. Now we go to the introduction to HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. All right. So the question is, what is HTML? All right. But let's just look at HTML in total. What does HTML even stand for? Now, HTML is all around us, right? So it is used in our websites, in our mobile apps, in our desktop apps, and other software you can think of. All right. Now it serves as the structure, the structural building block of our website. So you could say it is the foundation on which everything we build on the web sits on, right? So without the web, without HTML, we wouldn't have a structure of whatever we want to build. So we use it to lay out, just the same way an architect lays out a building plan, right? That's what HTML is for us. HTML is more like our the foundation we've built out of our building plan. All right. So when an architect lays out a building plan, the engineer starts from the foundation, right? So one must have laid out the building plan, maybe in form of wireframe or something. We've laid out how we want our site to be. We start building it the way we want it to be by laying a foundation for it, and that foundation comes in the form of HTML. HTML is the language we use to structure our website. So we call it a markup language or a structure language. All right. So it is a markup. We just use it to mark up or structure our web. Okay. So it tells us to put things where we want them to be. All right. Although when we are now done putting that, then after you must have laid your foundation, you have to put the blocks, give it the skeletal shape that it needs to have. That's what HTML is all about. It gives the skeleton the skeletal shape. You put your blocks, you put the lintels, you do the roofing, just the planks or woods without the zinc. Just that structure you see of a building. All right. So it's just the basic structure of our website that could be likened to a building that has been structured without the finishing touches. So as you can see from this slide over here, this is a building that has been structured, right? So ignoring these levers we have here, it's just structured. There are no other finishing touches to it, just the structure, right? So this is what HTML does to our help. It gives it the foundation and the structure in its complete form. So that's what HTML does for us. So that's why we call it the hypertext markup language. All right. So it also gives us the ability to link one file to the other. Okay. So it's from the name, you see that it's illustrates1. It gives you the ability to link files together. Secondly, it helps you to mark up or structure your website. Okay. So now HTML is simple. It's very, very simple to understand. There are no logics, there are no loops or functions, no conditionals, just straightforward language. That's why we say HTML is not a programming language. So don't get me wrong, HTML is not a programming language. So instead we refer to it as a markup or a structural language. Okay, so this second item here shows you why it is not a programming language. So it has no logics. There are no logics in HTML. You don't run loops in HTML or probably what you call iterations. There are no conditionals. There are no decision making in HTML, and there are no functions in HTML, just straightforward declarations. So that's why we say it is a declarative language. Okay, so in HTML, we don't have things like errors, more like logical errors or some kind of errors you think about. All right, so it just guesses and fixes your problems for you. Okay, so although sometimes we run into what we call syntactical errors that wouldn't stop your code from running. That's one thing you should know about HTML. Errors you run into in HTML wouldn't stop your code from running. Instead, it will skip them. If it doesn't really understand them, is either it skips them or it displays them in its raw form or in its pure format without having to interpret them. So, and sometimes it guesses and fixes the problem for you, although without altering the code, but then doing whatever it thinks or guesses you would want to do. All right. So that's HTML for you. There are no logics. It's not a programming language. It is just a declarative language. So now this is a simple illustration to show us what HTML simply implies or looks like using the human body. All right. So from what we have here, you can see the structure we have here as our HTML, right? So it only has the skeletal makeup or the skeletal mock-up of the human body. There are no organs, there are no muscles, there are no just the skeletal makeup of the human body. So that's what the HTML does in your web. It just gives the web its skeletal form, all right, the structure only. So when we now get to CSS, we'll still come back to this analogy over here. So we'll talk about how this talks about CSS and how this relates to JavaScript. But for now, we are going to only focus on HTML. All right. So whenever you go into your biology lab or you look at, you find a skeleton, what should go into your mind or what should ring in your mind is HTML. All right. So that's what HTML stands for in the web space. So now, what are the roles of HTML? So we have some roles that I've listed down here. So we'll take them one after the other. So it tells the browser where things are. So that's why we talk about structure. It structures your web page and tell your browser where the things that you need are. Now it possesses some functionalities that help you call and use some functions built into the browser. All right. So the tags, the semantics, everything that you have in HTML, there are some functionalities. Mind you, I didn't say function, they're not functions. So just saying that there are elements, all right, or functionalities on the HTML that tells the browser what you really want it to do. Okay, so it does that using some functions built into the browser. All right, so the browser has uh, interpreters or engines built into them that help them interpret whatever we've written in HTML. Okay, and like we said, it is the standard markup language for creating our website. All right, so we use it as the standard structural language for creating websites, and pretty much everything you do on the website is foundationed on HTML. So moving forward, we've actually taken a little bit of our time to talk about HTML, okay, and what HTML stands for. In our next class, we would be talking about the history or the versions of HTML actually, right? So I would bet or I would love it if you would go on your own, browse and read more about HTML. Just try to understand all these texts that we've talked about, all these things we've talked about here. Try to understand what they really imply, all right? So when we now come for our next class, we'll talk about the versions of HTML.